everyone. My name is Maribel Rodriguez. I'm the founder of Love for Immigrants. As you may or may not know, Love for Immigrants aims to create and inspire others to create narratives of immigrants where immigrants are portrayed with dignity and respect through pop-up art exhibits as well as storytelling. And today, for our first collaborative and virtual event, we have Luisa. Luisa joins us for the Art Healing speaker series and exhibit. Luisa is an art therapist with the organization Create Arts in Silver Spring, and we have the pleasure of having her. She's an art therapist with a master's from George Washington University, and she has a passion for working in community. Thank you, Luisa, for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marian. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and just I'm fascinated by your project. I think it's so needed, and I look forward to more collaborations with you.
Thank you, thank you. And the first question we have is to describe yourself a little bit.
Sure. So like you said, I'm Luisa. I'm an art therapist. I'm from Colombia, and I moved to the US 5 years ago, kind of with the idea of first doing my master's degree and taking it from there. I was a teacher previously, an art teacher, and I was just fascinated by art therapy. But honestly, I just didn't know enough. Now I know I didn't know enough to kind of like envision how that would play out in the future. And through my education at GW and the internships and just education that we have, kind of like I centered where I wanted to be as an art therapist, as a graduate art therapist. And my first job was at Community Advocates for Family and Youth, which is located in Prince George's County in Maryland. And was primarily with the undocumented community. And that's where I realized like this is really combining everything really that I wanted to do. This is my passion. And I really hope to continue to grow in that area.
Thank you for that. You gave me a lot more than what I could read online.
Oh, okay, good, that's good.
So we'll go to our next couple of questions, which I think is very important, like you mentioned previously. What would you suggest for immigrants and allies for how to deal with difficult emotions and difficult situations?
Yeah, for sure. So I thought a lot about that question actually when I received your email, because I think I would have to say both for immigrants and for allies to start with having resources. Therapy is a great resource, of course, to deal with difficult emotions and difficult situations. But I think having basic resources and knowing where to get them is the first step, even before therapy. So for example, having resources that you can reach out to if you don't know your rights, who can be an advocate for you? How can you be an advocate for yourself? Because it is often the case that immigrants can be stereotyped or subject to prejudice. And this is unfortunate, but it's important for them to know what to do when they find themselves in a tricky situation. And so I would say like starting with people's basic needs. Do they have shelter? Do they feel safe? Do they have food? Do they have work? And so once that's kind of like covered, then we can move to the emotional hardships. And it's often the case in certain cultures that still therapy or going to therapy and seeking services is an issue and is stigmatized. So I've found that it's often the case to just start by normalizing. We all go through difficulties. We all will need help at one point or another. And if you are or not part of that same culture with the person that you're working with, or you are the immigrant, understanding how our cultures play out when we take those decisions to seek out or not services, and gaining if in the case of the ally, for example, gaining the cultural knowledge and competence so that you can be there with the person and educate people on that, speaking the same language than they do, And so in that way, healing can start if like both people are speaking the same language, and the therapeutic process starts there, and then the counselor and the therapist or therapist and the client can kind of figure it out from there, and create a plan, a therapeutic plan based on that.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, basic needs absolutely are first, and the problem of mental health services being stigmatized is a big barrier. Thank you
Mhm.
for all your advice there. So I'm gonna throw a little question that I didn't send in the email, but hopefully you will find it interesting. So this one is, how does your own culture and background inform your healing practice, your own healing practice?
Yeah, yes, of course. I think um, I'm very grateful for, again, for my education in that aspect, because I think it was very unconsciously that that was happening to me. Even though, being an artist, I had realized, of course, doing my own art is expressing myself, and I can see parts of myself in my art. But it wasn't until I took a very hard look at my culture and parts of my identity uh, within my culture, outside of my culture, that I realized how big it is for most people, how we are impacted unconsciously. And so I would say, for me, being from Colombia, like, we're a very collective culture, and I've realized that for me it is very important to reach out, to be a part of a community, to have a sense of belonging, to feel validated, and kind of like allowing myself to put myself in that vulnerable position to reach out to people has been very important for me in my healing processes. But also I feel like for people to be able then to reach out to me and feel that we understand each other and we can support each other at different moments.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have that as immigrants when we come to this country. For my parents, when they came, the same thing of being part of a collective culture, and how
Mhm.
important it is to to understand that this in America, it's a whole new culture, and how do you keep parts of what you're used to and what helps you have well-being while you completely change your environment. And so
Mhm.
it's recreating it, like you're saying, it's finding that sense of belonging all over again. Yeah. And
Yeah.
me being half Colombian, I can relate, it resonates.
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't know if we can talk about it after too. I would love to hear that.
Right. Yes. Let's see. Okay. So this one is very much in mind, comes from a place of really thinking about the diversity of ages of people who might be listening from different ages. So, how does art help people from all ages, and
Mhm.
specifically any key impacts on children expressing through the arts as well as adults?
Yeah. I mean, the amazing thing about art therapy is that really art is generally inviting. It will be different for a child or an adolescent or an adult, but art therapists have the resources and the tools to go along with that. And so I say that because it is often the case that people ask if I only work with children. And no, it's really amazing that we can work with all ages. The senior population too, because of what I said, art is inviting in general. For children, it can have that element of play, but for adults, it can have maybe an element of like reminiscing childhood, doing something that is challenging. And so, because our brains have an immense ability to store information in images, and those are deeply personal too, in the way that people remember and store memories. Art provides a way to revisit those memories explicitly. So you often hear people say, like, an image is worth 1,000 words. And I absolutely believe that. And our therapy does that because they are complex. And we remember details that perhaps are not accessible from a rational or verbal state. So just the process of recreating that and reviewing that and exploring that is very powerful. And you can find things that you didn't even know were there. And of course, this goes again for people of all ages. And so in terms of impact, I would say it really depends on what the person is coming for and looking to get from the therapeutic process. So that is something that the therapist and the person that's coming in will figure out. But in general, the key impact is to build the ability to look at those images, because it is an extension of looking at oneself from another perspective, and then start to integrate those experiences based on that process.
Beautiful, really. I'm learning a lot here. To
Oh, great.
have a follow-up question to that one, to dig a little bit
Yeah.
deeper, in one of my very small one-credit courses of art healing, I remember certain kinds of arts were very helpful for certain types of things that people were going through. And for instance, there was the mask making that was very helpful for patients who, or people who had PTSD. So, in your
Mm.
experience, working with the art, different kinds of art, themes and materials and mediums, which art would be very helpful for people going through maybe the mourning process? We're mourning our lives, our past lives before
Mm.
COVID-19, and we're also mourning maybe people that we have lost. So what kind of art would do you think really helps with that?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a hard question. It's complex to answer because it will depend on each person. Uh, but maybe generally something that is a container of something. So say like boxes are really often used for grieving processes, in the act of having a container and then adding memories to it, and just being very careful, something that you carry with you, which is kind of like similar to a grief process. It's something that you carry with you. Nobody can see it. It's so personal, but it's your emotional baggage that you have with you. So in the case of boxes, for example, it can be adding pictures, adding your own drawings, adding collage, decorating the inside, decorating the outside. Um, and also mandalas are used often in those cases. Mandalas are a circle and you draw inside, and the directive is to start in the middle and then going outward, and how, you know, our unconscious self is talking from um, a metaphoric or symbolic stance, and it really starts to reveal a lot of where people are in grieving processes. But yeah, and again, because we're talking so much about culture, it probably should start by looking at how does that culture, this individual in their culture, grieve. Is it individually? Is it in community? Is it in silence? Because that is that, and in art that would be such a good resource too, because we're in silence most of the session. So, or is it loud too? It could be. And so all of those pieces of information can help a therapist create a treatment plan that is really unique to that person.
Wonderful. I really hear about the individualization of things, the importance of that person, and how different things are for different people. That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So many questions, so exciting.
Yes, yes.
Let's see. There's also how does art help with de-stressing
Mm-hmm.
and self-evaluation from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, I love that because it's in so many ways. It's also individualized, but art can help with reducing stress in multiple stages of therapy. So, art therapy is the marriage between art and psychology. So, from a creative perspective, when a person is creating something, people can find the process in itself soothing. For example, like painting or smashing, because in generally it's activating sensory motor areas, right? So often people comment that the process of art making help them get out of their heads. So maladaptive, patterns of behavior or anxious thoughts are interrupted when you're focused on creating something, when you're focused on just the mere fact of if it's, for example, a sculpture, of that soothing kind of touch that you experience, a painting, just the brush itself, you kind of like get in a different state of mind that interrupts that pattern. And from a psychotherapeutic perspective, processing those experiences that have been detrimental for the person's mental health through art, rather than talking, can be less stressful. Because usually when we're speaking in art therapy, looking at the images, we're speaking from a metaphorical level. So making the issue something that's outside of the person's body, it's more inviting and less threatening than asking very direct questions like, how are you today? Maybe that's so much to ask from a person that's going through a lot. So it's more inviting generally for people. And I would add there, not necessarily for everybody. Maybe somebody who is creating their own art starts to feel even more anxious. That I've seen that in very few cases, actually, in my experience, but of course that can happen. So art therapy is not necessarily for everybody, but I would say generally it is more inviting. And having that process then with the self-evaluation, I'd say it's probably like at a later point in therapy that this starts to happen, because first you are creating that relationship based on the trust that you establish with the person, then an environment that feels safe, and then work on developing self-efficacy skills, like just the success of, for example, creating something that wasn't created. People can come to therapy feeling like, no, I'm not an artist. I don't know what to draw. I don't know what to do. And just the fact that they do realize that they're capable of that is building self-esteem around the person. And so then individuals start to notice that certain patterns in their images or certain imagery, which can be metaphors that they use, words that they use, symbols, that those elements start to reflect things that they experience in their daily life, in their relationships. And the client or the person and community that you're working with and the therapist can start to unpack and kind of untangle that content to reframe those experiences so that the person develops the ability to view themselves critically. And I mean that in a positive way, like as a self-esteem, or with the difficulties that they're confronting, instead of demeaning him or herself for past decisions that they've made.
Thank you. Yes, this is absolutely wonderful. And looking at the idea of the difficulties that people go through, we spoke about some of those, like the mourning. We spoke about
Mhm.
those basic needs being needed to acknowledged and taken care of first. And transitioning towards understanding what can people do, not only to de-stress in general, but also
Mhm.
during the COVID-19 time where people are also afraid of getting sick, or maybe they're not afraid, maybe they're just in denial about getting sick, or whatever emotions people are going through during this time. How can, what's your advice for the listeners during this specific context?
Yes, I think something that is really different for me in this time is that we're all in this together. Um, as therapists and counselors, we learn certain boundaries that we keep generally in the sessions. But at this point, it's kind of impossible to deny or not address that we're all in the same boat, that we're all experiencing the same type of anxieties, that we're all uncertain about what's going on. So from an individual perspective, if that person or that community isn't part already of a community, I would say that reaching out to other people, just like we were talking about before, the importance of having a community, even more when people live alone, to start reconnecting with family members, with friends, of course, with pets, that's so powerful too. But having just a contact and a connection with somebody else that is experiencing the same thing can just help to, again, feel that sense of belonging, feel connected to other people, to validate that experience that we are having due to like the uncertainty of the pandemic, and normalize that those feelings that can be overwhelming. And more practical strategies, I would say, of course, walking in nature, hydrating, those things, picking up a new hobby, for example, something that gives an immediate sense of reward, but that is also helping your body and your mind to stay tuned. Um, yeah, I would say those things.
So I was mentioning to Luisa about how my mom and I have been dancing as a way to release that stress and to even get closer. And so my next question for Luisa is, what does healing mean to you?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, healing means to me to have the ability to integrate past memories, both uh, challenging and happy memories, um, and the person that you are now in one. So, of course, we're all made of different parts, like our childhood self, our adolescent self, and all of those sometimes feel like they're different people within one same story. And I think healing is that it's the capacity of integrating all of those experiences and alienating so that it can feel like you can deal with it, you can cope with it, and um, others can also see you as that person. You define who, how people perceive you.
Wonderful. And isn't that so hard to integrate all the parts of yourself and express it authentically?
It is. It's very, very hard. And that's why the role of art is amazing because, like we were talking before, art is kind of like that mirror to the unconscious and it helps to process hurtful memories in a safe manner rather than just confronting and kind of imposing integration. It's a form of uh, creating your emotions and your memories and your experiences, but then having the ability to integrate those memories in your own narrative. And literally it can be the exercise of creating a narrative through images with a person that you're working with, and then reviewing and how does that narrative change for the person. It's like one example is sometimes people um, say like, no, I am so impatient, or my relationship with my mom is so bad. Is that true now? Was it true then? And so all of those narratives that we have just as truths for us in art can be revisited, and creating that new narrative that really, you know, reflects the person that you are now, the growths that you've had, the changes that you want to make, and maybe things that can be more worked on in therapy.
Wonderful. Well, I don't have to ask the last question because I think you already answered it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which was about what are the top mindset shifts that people could have during this time to help them have well-being. And you definitely said it, is to pay attention to the stories we tell
Mhm.
ourselves as truth and that are hurtful to us. And maybe we've heard it when we were a child, oh, si tú sí estás gordita, or, you're a little
Yes.
chubby, which
Hmm.
is something I definitely heard. And it's the story, even if we, are happy where we are, we may still think that every once in a while, and to revisit and to figure out what that means for us. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Exactly.
So we're going to end it soon. Let me see if I could turn off my camera and talk.
Maybe if I can just say one more thing,
Yes,
actually,
please.
just that through all of this with the pandemic, it's really really obvious how social disparity can affect mental health. And I would say, like, with all of the things that we've talked about, those are wonderful things. And I really hope that everybody could have access to those tools. But we know that's not the case. So for people who can afford to stay at home and take care of those of their families and cope with the uncertainty, better or not, but have just the time, that's wonderful. And I wish that was the case for everybody. But financial stress and lack of access to healthcare services, and even more talking like in your project with immigrants, it's so important to be advocates for them. Of course, they are advocates for themselves, but in the profession that we are, to heighten those issues and really advocate for more funding, for more access to those services, because it's all a vicious cycle. Like we cannot go and work on ourselves and think about being on self-efficacy and actualization when financial stress is horrible, and that creates tension in family relationships, in your own self-esteem, with the ability of like providing for yourself and for others. So something that really I'm hoping that people get out of this situation is we all need the same basic rights. And in your project, that's so amazing, because that's the point of creating dignity, of creating respect, and of creating just a different narrative of who those people, and seeing the humanity of them in them.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because I think that's how change starts in many ways, is in the mind. One of the reasons why equity and equality, I think, aren't achieved is because there's so many thoughts and different ways of thinking about who should be worthy of certain resources and certain help. And I think it starts with the stories we tell. And on that point of resources, I'm really glad you mentioned that in one of the talking points, because there are organizations all over DC. We're DC based, and I know there are so many different people in different parts of the states who are also looking for resources. And so
Mm-hmm.
Ayuda in DC is one organization who does great work. And there's also a restaurant called Immigrant Foods who did a wonderful job putting together this vast resource list for people in different states even. And so that's something I'll have up on my website along with other resources, and you should be able to see it there if you're interested in seeing that and sharing with others. Definitely resources is a thing. I want to mention before we go, unless you have any other thoughts to
No.
express.
Thank you.
Thank you. This painting here I have in the background is by an artist. Her name is Micaela Anaya, and this is the name of this artwork is Dolores. And I wanted to give a little shout out there because art is also important to my life and it keeps me going when things are tough. So, little shout out to the artist who most generously gave this to us, my family and I.
Mm.
We will close out. Thank you, Luisa Murino Garcia. I'm so happy that you're able to be here with us today and share your knowledge, share your expertise, and of course, your passion for advocating for equality and immigrants and advocating for basic rights. Very important.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Maribel.